Good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to talk about today is some various issues regarding carbon programs and carbon contracts. The one thing I'm going to pick up on, just since there was a question in the chat, and I was going to jump in and say something about this A2 story that we just heard, which is somebody asked, who holds the trademark on A2 milk? It's a good question, because that is exactly what prompted us to dig a little deeper into some A2 research. And in fact, we have a researcher who is on loan to us from the National Agricultural Law Center named Andy Parnell, and Andy's with us here today, actually. She did some research for us on A2, and the issue on the intellectual property is that the A2 is a registered trademark to the New Zealand company, however, only in the configuration that they have registered, which is a small a and a essentially a capital or larger 2. And but the phrase A2 milk is not in any way proprietary. But the New Zealand company does own the little symbol that has a small a, sort of in an old style, like a Times New Roman type style, and a larger 2 in a circle configuration. And that's what they actually have registered. Okay. And by the way, we don't know who's supplying Hershey's actual fluid milk for that chocolate milk. The A2 New Zealand A2 company does have processing facilities, or by contract does have some processing in the United States going on. And so there are producers in the United States supplying them. I don't know the details on who they are and how that relationship, how long it's been in place, et cetera. But I do believe that is a market that is out there, and it may become larger as we go forward. And again, generally it's Jersey cows that have the genetic mutation that is tested for in order to essentially prove that it is truly the A2 milk without the A1 protein. Okay, now I'm going to, there we go. Okay, so we'll talk about dairy industry carbon reduction programs. First of all, I just want to touch base real quickly on something that has become sort of the lay of the land and a premise upon which all of this is based, which is a number that has developed in a study that was done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in their 5th assessment, which is this international body. And that was an assessment of data from 2014 and back. In other words, this number has not been updated since 2014, but the number is that agriculture, forestry, and other land uses related to those make up 24% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And that is, I guess, actually based upon a 2010 sort of fixed amount of global greenhouse gas emissions. But then the study was published in 2014. So the bottom line is we still live with that number of agriculture being responsible for 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Someday, I assume we're going to get a better number than that, and it may be refined down or up, depending on the circumstances. So that's something to keep in mind, is that when this number gets thrown around, it is a little bit old. Now, that number does not account for, as you see in this slide, it does not account for the CO2 that may be sequestered, or I should say the carbon, not the CO2, could be CO2 in some instances, but more carbon, in its other forms, in biomass, dead organic matter, soils. And that is estimated to offset the 24% by 20% of the 24%. So you're talking about, something like 5% reduction perhaps for the sequestering, that would knock that 24 down to maybe 19-ish, 19 and some change maybe, if you knock 20% off of the 24%. So the bottom line is that then becomes, well, wait a minute, that becomes sort of the concept that we then start to work off of, which is, okay, how much more can we sequester in the agricultural sector? And this pie chart, of course, gives you the respective global greenhouse gas emission shares of other industries. So that's just helpful to know where that comes from. And it took a little digging, but it's good to know exactly what that's all about and that it is a bit outdated. Okay, now, two types of carbon programs that we're going to talk about. We'll get back to the exact topic of that last slide again. First of all, you have the broad aspirational greenhouse gas reduction targets that companies adopt generally voluntarily, unless they're in a jurisdiction that has some type of mandatory carbon reduction by law, such as California at the present time. I don't know what other states do have something that is mandatory by law, but California in the dairy sector is one that is obviously getting a lot of attention. So that's the one area, these aspirational reductions. Then you have the other type of carbon program we're going to talk about, which is something that is generally connected to a producer's cooperative, and it is some type of a program for collecting data in preparation for or to specifically participate in right now some type of a carbon reduction program, either a percentage reduction like these aspirationals that is being required, let's say, across the co-op, or for whoever buys the milk from them wants their suppliers to be showing that, or it may be in order to participate in carbon markets by generating carbon credits and selling them for additional revenue. So again, you have the broad aspirational type targets, and then you have something that is more relationship based. In other words, the producer is affiliated with a co-op or sells to a certain purchaser who's requiring a certain accounting be done, or wants to encourage that they participate in carbon markets. Obviously, the co-ops want their members to, if that is extra income. So now, the first thing to talk about is an aspirational target, essentially, which is this U.S. Dairy Net Zero Initiative. And the Net Zero Initiative basically says greenhouse gas neutrality or better, so carbon neutral or better by 2050 is the aspiration that this U.S. Dairy Net Zero Initiative is based upon. Other little components: optimize water use for maximizing recycling and improve water quality to increase soil health by optimizing utilization of manure and nutrients and better handling of manure and nutrients. Optimizing, I guess, includes better handling. Now, U.S. Dairy attributes this back to, essentially, they commissioned a study, and it was done by a large contingent of University of Arkansas researchers in 2018. It was not published until 2013. So that's, or excuse me, in 2008, it was commissioned, and the work began, and then it's based on 2008 numbers, but it wasn't published in until 2013. Sorry, I said 18 there by mistake. So they credit that. U.S. Dairy says, well, that's the first food agricultural sector to conduct a full life cycle assessment at a national level, and that it showed that dairy contributes only 2% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. So that is the number that U.S. Dairy, at least, has adopted as dairy's responsibility for U.S. Greenhouse gas emissions. 2% is at dairy's feet, so to speak. Now, there are two benchmarks that are also sort of underlying this U.S. Dairy Net Zero Initiative. One is that in 2007, there were some fairly positive numbers to show the carbon footprint reduction from the dairy industry in 1944, which is 90%. Producing a gallon of milk uses 90% less land, 65% less water, and 63% smaller carbon footprint than it did in 1944. And that's published in the journal here, which I have indicated here. And you see the little pictures of the journals over here. That'll come up in later slides. And then in 2017, they updated that number again, that producing a gallon of milk is now requiring 30% less water than it did in 2007, 21% less land than it did in 2007, and 19% smaller total carbon footprint than in 2007. So in 10 years, there were some significant reductions in those numbers. So those are sort of the stats that underlie the U.S. dairy and its program. And it's good to know, again, I like to know where these things come from, and that's where they come from. Now, here are the players in the U.S. Dairy Net Zero Initiative. Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, which of course is a U.S. dairy entity. U.S. Dairy, of course, is primarily funded by the federal checkoff program, I believe. And then, of course, Dairy Management, Inc., as other related services to dairy producers, U.S. Dairy Export Council, IDFA, and National Milk. And then Nutrient is a sort of an ag technology and resource management company. I'm sure some of you may know more about what exactly they do than I do. The bottom line is the Net Zero Initiative also lists corporate sponsors. Nestle joined in 2020 and Starbucks in 2021. So that's kind of the players behind this. But of course, since it has National Milk in it, then you're talking about a program that then is essentially the program officially sanctioned or at least adopted by all the cooperatives that belong to National Milk to some degree, assuming that they are on board with it. Perhaps they maybe have taken a position that's slightly not quite full adoption, but I think for the most part, that, apart from a big one, which we'll talk about in a minute, Land O'Lakes, I think that these things then more or less become the adopted aspirational goals of the cooperatives themselves, all the various cooperatives in National Milk. Okay. Now, here's some of the little statistics that come out of those two studies that National Milk kind of used as the foundation. This is an interesting little graphic that shows you way over here on the right-hand side, you have the fluid milk, and that's 35.4 tons per gallon is the, I think that's what the TG stands for, although somebody might be able to correct me on what the G is. Maybe it's not per gallon. In fact, that probably sounds wrong. I've been using that in my prep, but now that I think about that, in any event, that's the net greenhouse gas emission for fluid milk. And then this graphic shows you all the contributing factors. As you can see, there's sort of over here on the left-hand side, they sort of take the farm level production, they're taking off, a percentage attributable to beef, dairy beef, they're taking off a percentage that's attributable to cream allocation. Maybe somebody can explain that one to me exactly why you're taking off cream. But in any event, then you go forward and you're adding in things such as transport of milk to processor. The processing process adds some degree of greenhouse gas emission, packaging, distribution, retail, consumption. So that sort of gives you this idea of, how are these gross numbers of greenhouse gases attributable to fluid milk arrived at. Oh, I see. The cream allocation is because of this being fluid milk, and these are the cream allocation is taken off for other products, not fluid milk products. Okay. Now, here's another chart that's a little easier to follow, and that also tells you an interesting story, which is this is once again greenhouse gas emissions organized by the step in the production process, essentially in dairy. You can see there's a feed allocation, a milk production allocation, meaning the cows themselves, a processing allocation, packaging, et cetera, et cetera. And then these colors give you they attribute what exact part of, let's say, milk production is attributable here, the enteric, so we have the actual bodily gases of the cow making up this purple portion of what is under the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions attributable to milk production. You have manure management making up another fairly large chunk of that. And then you have like electricity, obviously, for milking, et cetera, and a little sliver of fuel here. So this is an interesting chart to sort of digest over time and try to understand a bit about where in the process does the largest amount of greenhouse gas get generated, and in what exact portion of that process is it generated. But of course, you see the enteric and the manure management here in the milk production process are clearly making up a much larger chunk than anything else. Now, here is another way of looking at greenhouse gas emissions in the dairy industry that is organized by the type of gas being produced in certain processes. So in other words, in the red, enteric methane is all methane. Makes sense. Manure management is all methane, or is methane and nitrous oxide, I should say. It's just two greenhouse gases. Again, here's your color chart for the greenhouse gases that we're talking about. Feed rations, you have carbon dioxide, a little bit of methane, and a little bit of and a quantity of nitrous oxide. Transportation, obviously, you have exhaust from vehicles, and that's the big chunk of transportation. Again, that as you can see across the farm energy, transportation, retail, and consumption, the major greenhouse gas is straight carbon dioxide. So that gives you a little bit of a way of looking at it also that's somewhat helpful. But again, it tells you that enteric methane and manure issues are still the top contributors. Okay, this shows you a little bit of a change between, or a little bit of an explanation of the change between 2007 and 2017, that 10-year period where there were these reductions. It kind of gives you an idea of where they came from. And this hashed area that is hashed with the slants, that is the enteric and manure methane. So that's still making up the lion's share, really, for the most part, between that drop between 2007 and 17 that was experienced in total greenhouse gas emissions from dairy pretty much went evenly across the board, or came evenly across the board from these various processes that are involved, or various sources, let's just say, because this is a slightly different organizational system than the other charts we were looking at. Okay, let's look at mitigating dairy's environmental footprint. This is sort of a chart that shows you the idea behind, well, where would these savings come from in the dairy sector? And it gives you the breakdown here in a slightly different way with just between feed, enteric, manure, and energy. Then it is essentially giving you a breakdown with regard to each one of those areas where the savings could potentially be realized. In manure, okay, we have anaerobic digestion, obviously a way to reduce or to consume a lot of methane in a way that is not admitting it into the atmosphere. Again, all of these other drying technologies, for example, nutrient and water recovery, in other words, a processing, of stored manure, simple things like covering, manure storage, et cetera. So this gives you a little breakdown. It's nice to look at, and this is all straight out of the U.S. Dairy's Net Zero Initiative website. Okay, now let's talk about the three components to the Net Zero Initiative. They call them, and these are a little funny terminology, but groundwork, which is essentially science and research. Still a lot needed, but that's the first component of what's needed to realize this 2050. That's the right, again, let's go back, and I want to misstate it again. The actual aspiration is net neutrality or better by 2050. Okay, so to get there, groundwork, which is foundational science. Dairy scale for good. That's a funny term to say. Basically, if you read this using their language, it is, we want to have pilot programs that will test out what is the most effective reduction methods and pretty much of these ones that are seen here. And also collective impact, which is then spreading the pilot program results to the broader, dairy sector to be adopted at a much higher rate of adoption than when they were just simply pilot programs. So not thrilled with the specificity of the net zero initiative in terms of what they're, what's really the plan here. It's good to know the background and the statistics that make it up and to look at them and understand them, but it's a little short on detail, no question about it. Now, here's another aspirational commitment that just hit the news recently, so I put it in here. There aren't a lot of these, other than the U.S. dairy aspiration of this net neutrality by 2050. There aren't a lot of other companies doing something independent of that in the dairy sector. Here, the French cheese company that people are familiar with from the Laughing Cow and these Baby Bell, they have just recently hit the news. It was earlier this month with their commitment to a net reduction of 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions through their entire value chain by 2035. And so there's a link. You can get this PowerPoint. I would suggest you do. I have links everywhere to the actual primary sources on this. You don't get a lot of this other type of aspirational commitments from many dairy companies. The U.S. dairy program for the net zero initiative is pretty much the industry standard. That is, IDFA is part of it. So you got the processor side, National Milk is part of it. You got the producer side. It's pretty much taking the place of all these individual companies announcing different aspirational goals. Now, let's talk about more concrete things. This is something very concrete, which is Land O'Lakes in February of 2021. They went way past the aspirational goal side. They actually have a program that they've created, a company called Truterra, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Land O'Lakes, and they are doing a farmer-owned, because it's the same ownership structure, carbon marketplace starting at a certain point, and they're going to build it up. It's not a full-blown contract, carbon contract system yet for either Land O'Lakes members or, and it's again, when you scour the Truterra website, nowhere does it say that their services and what they will do for a dairy farmer is limited to Land O'Lakes members. And so that's, as far as I can tell from researching this, it is not limited to Land O'Lakes members. Other cooperative members, other dairy farmers, in whatever their situation may be, independents or cooperative members, they can employ the services of Truterra, as far as I can tell from looking at the website. Now, they have already lined up contracts with Microsoft to purchase the carbon credits that they would generate for those who use Truterra's services to help them generate them. They are quoting a price of $20 per ton of carbon sequestered. Now, how you measure that, of course, is where the details become important. But that's the number that they are telling people that they are paying for. But again, it's not a full-blown carbon contract yet, and I'll discuss that in a minute. In 2021, they kind of are taking it in this 1-year enrollments, and because of the immaturity of the market, let's say, they are not doing full-blown carbon contracts yet. They certainly envision getting there at some point, but they want everybody to start with a more rudimentary system, and which I'll go over real quick. And that creates some baselines that then people will be ready when they've enrolled in this program, and this program has existed for a few years, and they feel confident that they are now in a marketplace that they understand and that has matured to some point. Then they will be offering more of a traditional, what you might have read about as a carbon contract with multi-year commitments, perhaps. Right now, they're doing basically a 1 year at a time thing here at Truterra. So they paid out $4 million for over 200,000 tons for 2021. 2022 is a completely new enrollment year for Truterra. So even those who enrolled in 2021, they have to re-enroll in 2022. So again, it's a $20 per ton for additional carbon removed due to practice changes on eligible land for up to 3 years back. Now, if you enrolled in 2021, you don't have a full 3 years of look back, so to speak, for them to document your practice changes that saved carbon. But this is kind of, this statement over here is assuming a new enrollment, so to speak. Now, participating farmers who do this, so in other words, what this means is this is a 2022 savings, and you can look back to what you did in 2021 and 2020. Did I do that right? 2021, 2020, and 2019. I guess that's the 3 years. I find I'm a little confused between the way they've worded their two look back periods, because one of them almost sounds like it's a 4-year period. The bottom line is a limited look back period that they will in fact pay, and they are going to pay the Truterra will pay the cooperative member essentially up front. In other words, it's not based upon Truterra hooking you up with Microsoft, which is their exclusive buyer right now. They're essentially fronting the money to the producers. The transaction where the money comes back in by selling some type of a carbon credit to Microsoft is a financial arrangement that is separate from the producer getting their check. It's kind of, two separated transactions, so to speak. The money is being fronted and then being collected on the back end by Truterra / Land O'Lakes. As it says here, participating farmers will receive a one-time payment paid in full upon completion of verification, which would be in the fall of 2022 if you signed up at the beginning of, and I don't know the exact, you got to go to the website to see what the cutoff point is for enrollment and that sort of thing. But you get the idea, which is it's kind of like a front-loaded payment to a producer by Truterra, seemingly not having to be a Land O'Lakes member. I could be wrong. Somebody could point out to me fine print I'm not seeing. And then if you're enrolled for 2022, Truterra takes care of getting their money back from selling the carbon credit to, and again, Microsoft is who they're selling them to. So that is again, the details over here are pretty much, the same things that we sort of alluded to here. So that's the way that you get money, the first way you get money under Truterra's current program that exists. And the enrollment process, when they say paid in full upon completion of verification, the enrollment process has all of this verification involved in it, takes months and months. But if they verify that you have set forth what you've done in terms of carbon savings back in this 3-year period, and then you will get paid in this year. You have to re-enroll for 2023, however. Now, there's a second way to get paid, which is this is essentially planning. It is $2 per acre, and I shouldn't say it, I cut myself off there. This is essentially a plan for encouraging dairy farmers to adopt various carbon reduction practices, and they will pay simply for the adoption of those practices, not based on any proven tonnage of carbon, gas or carbon emission savings. So it's just $2 per acre. It's a much smaller amount, obviously. $2 per acre for each eligible practice that you change in the crop year 2022. But there's no long-term commitment that you must keep doing this year after year after year to get your money. It's a 1-year thing. You get paid $2 per acre per practice that you adopt in this calendar year, and then next year is a new story. Now, I think the objective here, and I'm sure that someone who could articulate this more than I've been able to see forward right now, but the idea is to lay a groundwork that the farmer has done the low-hanging fruit, and now getting to the next level and getting to the next level. And it is to, create a body of farmers who are in, dairy producers who are in fact current, up to date with the best practices, and will be ready when the time comes to sell multi-year contracts. So I think that's the objective here. Now, where Truterra gets this $2 per acre back on the back end, I think this is their investment in in the market to keep to stimulate and keep a market in existence. And I don't know that this is directly that $2 per acre. There's not a carbon credit of any kind that's being generated that they sell to Microsoft, and so this is sort of an investment in the industry to keep it moving in this direction, perhaps is the way to say it. This would kind of tell you that maybe they want to limit this to their own membership. But again, I see no evidence of that in the material that I've been looking at. Okay, now, one of the things that might be helpful to understand is that the Truterra's number that they will throw around is generally that 1 acre of regeneratively managed soil can sequester between 0.2 to 0.7 tons of carbon annually. So if you go back to that $20 a ton, you can start to see, depending on what processes or best practices you're using, you can start to do a little math to figure out what it takes to produce a ton of carbon or greenhouse gas to be paid on that $20 per ton. Okay, we're going to do a poll right now, which is going to help you or help us, I should say, know what to cover as a topic in future programs. So I'm just going to minimize that for myself and continue on. Okay, that is, why am I not able to advance? There we go. Okay, now so I will say as a preview, since we got about 10 minutes left, Truterra's program is essentially the most advanced and that is specific to dairy. There isn't really anything else like that. There aren't any particular carbon contracts like you see some of these other companies that are, that are advertising, Indigo and others. None of those are geared to dairy. This Truterra thing is the only thing that is specific to dairy. However, the F.A.R.M program, which is that general, was an animal, animal care, humane practices type of program. Voluntary industry program has now expanded to have this environmental stewardship evaluation process program, essentially to get dairy producers ready for the world of getting paid for carbon savings. And I'm going to skip past some of this in order to get to some questions if we have them. But I just want you to understand that this is the only other thing that really is out there like Truterra's. This isn't a situation where anybody's getting paid for anything. This is simply a data collection and a best practices evaluation that producers can do through the F.A.R.M program's environmental stewardship portion to see where they stand. How much savings could they achieve if they wanted to enter an actual carbon contract? And what types of practices would they need to be adopting? And there's this whole thing that is, there's an evaluation preparation guide, which I've linked down here. And then there is a thing called, the F.A.R.M Environmental Stewardship Reference Manual. Now, what happens with the F.A.R.M program is they do a full analysis, and you sit there at your computer and input all a bunch of data, and again, F.A.R.M is usually brought to you, a producer, by their cooperative, and input all the data. Eventually, you get spit out a a little report like this thing, this little figure 1 here, that shows what your carbon footprint is, what the regional average is, and what the national average is. And then dividing it up between on-site manures, the green, feed production is the light green, on-site enteric, discharges is the orange, and then you got on-site energy use as the blue. So it gives you a breakdown. Then you go to this stewardship reference manual, and this is a little example of, oh, I need to improve my on-site enteric. Okay, I'm going to go look at chapter 3 and 4 and, start getting into the things that they are recommending be done here in order to achieve cost savings in the on-site enteric category, for example. So that's what this F.A.R.M program does, is it gives you recipes to, prepare yourself to save carbon and what parts of your dairy need to be addressed more than other parts, perhaps. So you can see both of these are kind of baby steps, or they are preparation to enter the carbon markets, but yet not entering them yet. And I think I really like the idea, it seems, of the Truterra, because it's providing income, but it's not jumping in full bore yet. It's letting this market, come to some level of maturity, which, we have all seen, it hasn't advanced at all, basically, since the explosion of information about carbon markets at the beginning of this particular presidential administration. We all saw the difference between what any of us ever heard about, carbon markets in December of 2020 versus what we knew and heard about carbon markets in January 2021 was like night and day. It was like the floodgates opened and all of a sudden everybody's talking about carbon markets, as of January 2021. We all thought it was going to fly through and become this very active field. Well, now it's kind of, slowed down to a complete crawl again. By the way, here is Organic Cooperative or Organic Valley just announced not too long ago that they have put together a funding package, or gathered a funding package, I'll say, of $2.2 million to do some test projects with some of their California member farms, with the idea that these will then become whatever works out, whatever shakes out as very beneficial and effective, they will try to spread to their other 36 members in California, and they have about 2,000 across the country. That's the only indication that we were able to find of an organic cooperative that had sort of their own version. Obviously, they do have a little bit of different practices on the farm. Not a whole lot that may affect carbon savings, but some. I guess I got to think that one through. But Organic Valley is the only one that has a specific sort of public pronouncement that they're going to work up their own version of what are the best practices for our members. Okay, now here's one thing, last item, because it looks like we don't have any questions, right, Ross? I see in the chat, I see one. There you go. Okay, so you figured that one out for me, Ross. A TG is 1 trillion grams. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a teragram.
Right.
Yeah, okay, we don't have any questions. If someone does have a question, please submit it.
Yep.
So that we can get to that. But we have 3 minutes left. So
that's just perfect for this.
No questions, Brooke. You can just finish up here.
This is my last slide, more or less. And this is okay. You might hear about this like today or this week or very soon. In fact, Ross, not knowing that I was preparing something on this, sent me the last article that was in Politico just this morning. And it was exactly the topic that I was going to cover here. Right now, there seems to be a lot of media attention being paid to an interesting little quirk of what's going on right now. And NPR did a thing on it last week. And then there's some older publications that explain it very well. California has this low carbon fuel standard program, which is meant to be a way to cut down on carbon emissions relating to transportation fuels. But one of the transportation fuels that they include is natural gas. due to natural gas powered vehicles, and particularly wanting to allow or encourage and incentivize renewable natural gas production for vehicle use. Well, those that own anaerobic digesters, and particularly dairy operations, are realizing that they can capture their methane from their anaerobic digester and get a decent payment right now from California under California's renewable natural gas credit program for methane that they're producing. It could be a farm in Iowa, could be a farm in New York, could be a farm in Pennsylvania. In fact, this article in Politico is all about New York dairy farmers who are essentially capturing the methane from anaerobic digesters located in New York. And as long as they sell it into the interstate pipeline process that carries methane, there's a little bit of cleaning up that needs to be done. But the bottom line, it is more economically advantageous than generating electricity on your farm with your digester. It's more advantageous to sell it and claim the California renewable natural gas credit. So believe it or not, that is what's going on. Out-of-state dairies are selling their methane to methane pipelines in order to qualify for the California renewable natural gas credit. And this article, what's worth more, a cow's milk or its poop, that article from this researcher from UC Davis lays out the finances of that. And apparently it is very favorable right now. Let's just put it that way for dairy farmers.
Yeah, Brooke, we do have one question. Let's try to, if we could get this question.
Yep, sure.
We have, I think, a minute left.
Would a producer's existing,
would a producer's existing regenerative practices count in carbon market payments or only newly implemented gains?
That depends from program to program. And that is one of the reasons that Growing Climate Solutions Act on the federal level is felt to be necessary, because we don't know where the clock is going to start running on existing regenerative practices. You saw the Truterra, if you were following, and maybe I wasn't explaining well, but Truterra has this look back period of 3 years. And so they will in fact pay for documentable carbon savings if attributable to regenerative practices that existed in the 3 years preceding your enrollment. But you saw like the idea, the Truterra payments that were based upon the individual practices, that's only for brand new practices. But the Truterra program will pay for things in a 3-year window. So hopefully that does answer.
And just as a final comment, an attendee submitted a note saying that it's their understanding that Truterra is not just dairy specific, that any farmer can sign up. So with that, we've reached the end of our hour. I thank all of you for attending this session. Again, if you are getting Pennsylvania CLE credits, please submit that form so that we can get that submitted to the CLE board. And we will be doing our next quarterly dairy legal webinar in April of this year. So we will send out notifications to give you more details on that program. So thank you all.